The first time I saw the man they called the Grizzly, he was standing in the ruins of my family's legacy, holding a deed that made him the owner of everything I had ever loved. My uncle, a fool with a deck of cards and a thirst for whiskey, had lost it all to him in a single night: the Blackwood Ranch, the cattle, and the guardianship of his only niece. Me. Lena Hayes was my name. For how much longer, I wasn't sure. The man, Cassius Grant, was not merely tall. He was a monolith of a man, broad-shouldered and solid, with hands that looked like they could crush stone. He stood in the parlor of my home, his presence making the familiar room feel small and foreign. "The offer is simple, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "Marriage. You keep the roof over your head. The Blackwood name stays on the land. You have my protection." "And if I refuse?" I asked, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. His storm-gray eyes held mine. "Then I claim the property, as is my right, and you are turned out with the clothes on your back. A woman alone. The frontier is not kind." I had no choice. I knew it. He knew it. So I married him. There was no joy in the ceremony. It was a transaction, witnessed by a bored preacher and two of Cassius's men. When it came time for the kiss, he had to stoop so low I felt a breeze. His lips were a brief, impersonal touch, and it was over. I was Lena Grant. He brought me back to the ranch, my ranch, which now felt like a gilded cage. That evening, as I tried to settle my nerves in what was now our bedroom, a knock came at the door. "Lena." It was him. I opened the door to find him filling the frame, still dressed in his trail clothes. He didn't enter, respecting the boundary. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said, his gaze fixed on a point over my shoulder. "And I know what they say about me in town, that I'm a brute, a grizzly. I won't force a wedding night on you. The door will remain unlocked. You have nothing to fear from me." He turned to leave, but a spark of defiance, fueled by a day of helplessness, made me speak. "And what if I am not afraid?" He stopped, his broad back to me. "Then you're a fool. You should be." "Are you going to hurt me, Mr. Grant?" He turned then, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, but a deep, weary frustration. "Not by intention, but a man my size. I could hurt you by accident. Just by existing in the same space. That's the truth of it." He left me then, and I heard his heavy footsteps retreat down the hall to the spare room. I was alone, my heart pounding. He was nothing like I had expected. The monster of the town's gossip was a man who was afraid of his own shadow, or rather, the shadow he cast over me. The next morning, I rose early and made breakfast. I found him in the barn, mending a harness. His hands, so massive and calloused, worked. The leather with a surprising delicacy. "I made biscuits," I said. He nodded. "Thank you." We ate in a silence that was not entirely uncomfortable. After, he showed me around the ranch, not as an owner, but as a partner. "You know this land better than I ever will," he admitted. "Your father built something good here. I just want to keep it that way." As the days turned into weeks, a tentative rhythm developed. I ran the household. He managed the stock and the men. The town watched us, waiting for the explosion. They expected to see me broken, or for his famous temper to finally show itself. It happened at the general store. I was buying fabric when I overheard two women talking. "Can't imagine. That giant and little Lena Hayes. It's unnatural." "My husband says he heard from one of Grant's men that he had to have a special bed built. Can you imagine?" My face burned. I turned slowly. "Mrs. Dobbs, Mrs. Lee, I'd be careful. My husband has very large ears, and he dislikes gossip about his wife." They flushed and scurried away. When I told Cassius about it that evening, his jaw tightened. "I'll have a word with their husbands." "No," I said firmly. "I handled it. I'm not a porcelain doll for you to shield from every harsh word." He looked at me, a long, measuring look. "No," he agreed, a faint, almost smile touching his lips. "I suppose you're not." One afternoon, a group of rough-looking men rode into the yard. I recognized their leader, Jeb Miller, a rancher from the next valley who had been trying to buy Blackwood for years. He'd made me an offer, too, after my uncle's death. It had involved me becoming his wife in all but name. Well, well, Miller drawled, his eyes sliding over me. If it isn't little Lena. I see you found yourself a new master. Hope he's treating you better than that old drunk of an uncle. Before I could reply, Cassius was there. He hadn't made a sound, but he was suddenly beside me, his presence a solid wall of muscle and quiet threat. You're on my land, Miller, Cassius said, his voice dangerously calm. State your business and leave. Miller smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just paying a social call, Grant. Wanted to see how the new arrangement was working out. She's a tiny thing. You sure you know how to handle her? Cassius took one step forward. Just one. But it was enough to make Miller's horse sidestep nervously. The only thing you need to know, Cassius said, is that Lena Grant is under my protection, and I protect what's mine. Now get off my property. Miller and his men left, but not before shooting me a look of pure venom. When they were gone, Cassius turned to me. His hand came up, and for a moment I thought he would touch my face, but he let it fall. Are you all right? He asked. I am, I said, and found that I meant it. For the first time since my uncle's betrayal, I felt truly safe. Thank you. That night, as we sat by the fireplace, the silence between us was different. It was charged, filled with things unsaid. Why did you do it? I asked softly. You could have just taken the ranch, thrown me out. Why offer marriage? He stared into the flames for a long time. I saw your picture, he said finally, on your uncle's desk. You were smiling. You looked happy. This place is your home. I've never had a real home. I didn't want to be the man who destroyed yours. His honesty disarmed me completely. The Grizzly was a lonely man who wanted a home. I stood and walked over to his chair. He watched me, his stormy eyes wary. I placed my small hand on his broad chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. Then let's build one, I whispered. Together. I leaned in and kissed him. It was not the chaste kiss from our wedding. This was a choice, my choice. For a moment he was rigid with shock. Then a low sound rumbled in his chest, and his arms came around me, so carefully as if I were made of the most fragile glass. But I wasn't fragile, not anymore, and I was determined to show him that. I'd love to know where in the world you're following this story from. Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The kiss in front of the fire didn't end with a sudden, dramatic consummation. It ended with Cassius pulling back, his breath ragged, his forehead resting against mine. Lena, he murmured, my name a rough prayer on his lips. We need to go slow. I understood. His fear wasn't of me, but for me. And so we began a new kind of courtship, one that happened after the vows were already spoken. He taught me to shoot a revolver, his massive hands enveloping mine, patiently correcting my stance. I taught him the history of the land, showing him the hidden springs and the best grazing pastures my father had charted. We were in town buying supplies when we saw Jeb Miller again. He was leaning against the post office, a sneer on his face. Well, if it isn't the happy couple. Still in one piece, Mrs. Grant? I'm surprised. Cassius's whole body went still beside me, a predator sensing a threat. But before he could speak, I stepped forward. The only thing surprising here, Mr. Miller, is that you have so much time to waste on other people's business, I said, my voice clear and carrying. My husband is a busy man. We both are, so if you'll excuse us. I took Cassius's arm, feeling the coiled tension in his bicep, and guided him away. The look of shock on Miller's face was worth 1,000 words. As we walked, Cassius let out a slow breath, and the tension eased from his frame. You didn't need to do that, he said quietly. I know, I replied. I wanted to. That small victory was a turning point. The town's whispers began to change, shifting from pitying the tiny bride to respecting Grant's wife. I was no longer just an accessory to the Grizzly. I was becoming his partner. One evening, a well-dressed stranger arrived at the ranch. He introduced himself as Mr. Alistair Finch, a lawyer from Boston. He had papers, he said, concerning an inheritance from my mother's side of the family, a significant sum of money held in a trust, now released upon my marriage. "It's all perfectly in order, Mrs. Grant," Finch said, his smile too smooth, his eyes too sharp, "though the claim must be processed in person back east. A formality, of course. I can arrange everything." Cassius was silent, his gaze fixed on Finch like a hawk. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. It was too convenient, too perfectly timed. "We'll need to review the documents with our own lawyer," I said, my tone polite but firm. "You can leave them with us, Mr. Finch." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "The window to claim is quite narrow, I'm afraid." "Then it's a good thing we don't believe in windows," Cassius rumbled, finally speaking. His voice left no room for argument. "You'll have our answer tomorrow." After a tense dinner, Finch retired to the guest room. Cassius and I retreated to our bedroom, a room we now shared, though our intimacy was still a slow, careful exploration of trust. "It's a trap," Cassius said the moment the door closed. "I've seen his type before. He's a claims adjuster. He gets you alone, away from your protection, and the inheritance disappears, along with you." "I know," I said, unloading the pistol I kept in my dresser drawer. "But he's also given us an opportunity." Cassius raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "He thinks I'm a helpless Eastern girl you married for a ranch. He doesn't know you've been teaching me to shoot. He doesn't know I'm the one who manages the ledgers. He underestimates me." I looked up at my husband, a plan forming in my mind. "Let's use that." The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I was all wide-eyed enthusiasm about the trip east, chattering about seeing Boston again. I saw the condescending gleam in Finch's eyes. He thought he had me. Cassius, following our plan, was the reluctant, overprotective husband. "I don't like it, Lena. The journey is too dangerous." "But Mr. Finch will be with me the entire time," I insisted, laying a hand on his arm. "It's our future, my love. This money could mean so much for the ranch." We argued for Finch's benefit, a performance of marital discord. Finally, Cassius relented, on the condition that one of his most trusted men, a quiet tracker named Eli, accompany us as far as the railway station in Cheyenne. Finch, confident he could handle one ranch hand and a small woman, agreed. The plan was simple. Eli and I would turn the tables on Finch during the journey, get a confession, and bring him to the sheriff in Cheyenne. Cassius would pretend to stay behind to manage the ranch, but would actually follow at a distance with more men, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. The day of departure was crisp and clear. As I mounted my horse, Cassius came to my side. He placed his hands on my waist, his touch now familiar and steadying. "If you have even a sliver of doubt," he whispered, his voice for my ears only, "you put a bullet in him and ride. Don't hesitate. I will find you." "I know," I said, leaning down to kiss him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a promise of return. The first day of riding was uneventful. Finch was a surprisingly competent horseman, but he talked too much, his stories too polished. That night, as we made camp, I played my role, asking naive questions about Boston society. Eli stayed silent, sharpening his knife by the fire. It was on the second day, as we entered a narrow canyon, that Finch made his move. He drew a concealed, small-caliber pistol from his coat. "I'm afraid the scenic route ends here, Mrs. Grant," he said, his smooth voice now hard. "You're going to sign these papers assigning the inheritance to me. Then, you and your silent friend are going to have a very unfortunate accident with some bandits." Eli went rigid, his hand hovering near his own gun. "Mr. Finch," I said, keeping my voice deliberately calm, "do you really think my husband would let me travel with only one guard?" Finch laughed. "The Grizzly? He's back at his ranch, counting his cattle. A man like that married you for property, not for love. He'll be relieved to be rid of the complication." He was so sure, so arrogant. He didn't see the signal I gave Eli, a slight nod. "You're wrong," I said, and in one fluid motion I drew the revolver from my saddle holster, cocked the hammer, and aimed it squarely at his chest. My hand didn't shake. Cassius Grant married me because I asked him to, and he taught me to shoot because I demanded it. Now drop the gun. The shock on Finch's face was absolute. He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and Eli, who now had his rifle leveled. A single, thunderous gunshot echoed through the canyon. The pistol flew from Finch's hand, his fingers numbed by the impact of a bullet that had grazed the barrel. The shot had come from the rim of the canyon above us. We all looked up. There, silhouetted against the sky, was Cassius. Smoke curled from the barrel of his rifle. He was a terrifying and beautiful sight. He hadn't waited for things to go wrong. He had simply been there, watching, a guardian angel with a rifle. Finch surrendered instantly. As Eli tied him up, Cassius climbed down the canyon wall with an agility that belied his size. He came straight to me, his eyes searching my face. "I had him," I said, a little breathlessly. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first I'd ever seen. It transformed him. "I never doubted it for a second, Lena Grant," he said. "Not for a single second." The confrontation with Finch solidified something between Cassius and me. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a fierce, unshakable partnership. We returned to Blackwood Ranch not as a man and his unwanted bride, but as a united front, the Grizzly and his wife. The town's whispers finally died, replaced by a respectful silence. Life found its rhythm. A new, unspoken trust guided our days. Cassius no longer hesitated to touch me, a hand on the small of my back as we passed in the hallway, his fingers brushing mine when I handed him a cup of coffee. His touches were still measured, a constant, conscious control of his strength, but they were no longer born of fear. They were promises. One evening, as I stood on the porch, watching a storm gather over the distant mountains, he came to stand behind me. He didn't say a word, just rested his hands on my shoulders, his warmth seeping through my dress. I leaned back against his solid chest, and his arms came around me, enveloping me completely. We stood like that as the first drops of rain began to fall, a silent testament to a battle we had won without firing a single shot at each other. Weeks later, a different kind of storm arrived. A fever swept through the valley, and it didn't spare the ranch. I fell ill first, burning up and shivering in turns. Cassius, who had never known a day of sickness in his life, became a relentless nurse. He moved a cot into my room, spending his nights listening to my ragged breathing, cooling my brow with damp cloths, his massive hands impossibly gentle. Just as I began to recover, he succumbed. Seeing the indomitable Cassius Grant laid low by a simple fever was a terrifying sight. His big body was racked with chills, his face pale. The doctor bled him and left tonics, but it was the sickness's course to run. For 3 days, I returned the care he'd given me. I propped his heavy head up to sip broth, I wrestled with damp sheets to change them, and I talked to him through the delirium. In his fevered state, his guard fell completely. He muttered about his childhood, about drifting from town to town, about the first time he saw the Blackwood land and dreamed of putting down roots. He called my name, his voice rough with worry, asking if I was safe. On the 4th day, the fever broke. He woke, weak but clear-eyed, to find me asleep in the chair beside his bed, my hand clutching his. He didn't pull away. He just watched me, and when I stirred, his gaze was softer than I had ever seen it. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice raw. "Where else would I be?" I replied. It was after his recovery that the final ghost from his past appeared. Her name was Isabel Duval. She was a striking woman, tall and bold, with a confidence that came from a life lived on her own terms. She rode into the yard on a fine black mare, her eyes scanning the property with a familiar, assessing gaze. "Cassius," she called, a smile on her lips as he emerged from the barn. "I heard you'd gone and gotten yourself civilized." I stepped out onto the porch, a knot tightening in my stomach. This was no lawyer or rival rancher. This was a different kind of threat altogether. "Isabel," Cassius said, his tone neutral, This is my wife, Lena. Lena, this is Isabel. We hunted bounties together, a long time ago." Isabel's eyes swept over me, and I saw the same calculation I'd seen in Finch, but tinged with a personal scorn. "I see. Well, you always did have a soft spot for lost causes." I felt a flash of anger, hot and bright. I walked down the steps and stood beside Cassius, not in his shadow, but at his side. "The only thing lost here is your sense of timing, Miss Duval. My husband is retired." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Men like Cassius don't retire, little girl. They just get bored. There's a job, the Silas gang, 5,000 on their heads. He's the only one I'd trust at my back." "My wife speaks for me," Cassius said, his voice gaining that final, unyielding tone I knew so well. "I'm not interested." Isabel's smirk faded. She looked between us, and for the first time, she saw it, not a giant and his captive, but a partnership, a union. The realization dawned in her eyes, and with it, pure spite. "Fine. Stay here and play house," she sneered, gathering her reins. "But know this, Grant. The Silas gang is headed this way. They heard about the man who took down Jeb Miller's crew and the Boston Shark. They see you as a challenge. Your quiet little retirement is about to get very loud, and when it does, you'll wish you had a real fighter at your side, not a porcelain doll." She rode out, leaving a poisonous silence in her wake. Her words were a prophecy. Within a week, the signs were there. Fences cut, a calf slaughtered, a sense of being watched that set every nerve on edge. Cassius doubled the patrols. We slept with loaded rifles by the bed. The attack came on a moonless night. They didn't bother with stealth. Silas and his 6 men rode in shooting, setting fire to the bunkhouse, their shouts tearing through the peace of the valley. It was chaos. The acrid smell of smoke, the orange glow of flames, the deafening roar of gunfire. Cassius was a force of nature, a moving fortress, drawing their fire while our men took positions. I didn't hide. I took my rifle to the bedroom window, my hands steady as I reloaded and fired, providing covering fire for our hands below. I saw Silas, a hulking brute with a scar down his face, break from the fray and head for the main house. For me. He knew Cassius's weakness. He kicked the front door open, his eyes wild in the firelight. "Come on out, little wife. Let's see what the Grizzly fights for." I stepped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, my revolver raised. "You're trespassing." He laughed and charged. I fired. The shot hit his shoulder, spinning him around. He roared in pain and kept coming. I fired again, but he was too fast, slapping the gun from my hand. His meaty hand closed around my throat, slamming me against the wall. I clawed at his arm, spots dancing in my vision. There was a sound like a thunderclap. Silas's head snapped to the side. His grip loosened, and he crumpled to the floor, revealing Cassius, standing in the shattered doorway, his smoking pistol in his hand. His eyes were not those of the gentle man who feared his own strength. They were the eyes of the Grizzly, cold and deadly. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his boot rolling Silas's unconscious body aside. His hands came to my face, his touch a shocking contrast to the violence of a moment before. "Lena, look at me. Are you hurt?" I shook my head, gasping for air. "I'm all right." He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could feel the frantic beat of his heart against my cheek. It was in that moment, surrounded by the smell of gunpowder and smoke, that he said the words for the first time. "I love you, Lena," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I have since you stood up to those gossips in the store. My brave, beautiful wife." Tears welled in my eyes. I looked up at him, at this man who had been a stranger, a protector, a partner, and now, finally, the love of my life. "I love you, Cassius Grant." The fight was over. Silas was trussed up, his gang scattered or captured. As the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, we surveyed the damage. The bunkhouse was a loss, but the main house stood. Our home stood. Cassius stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on the top of my head. We watched the sunrise over the land we had fought for, the land we had built a life on. "It's over," I said softly. No, he corrected, his voice a quiet rumble against my back. It's just beginning. He was right. The man who won me in a debt and the woman who married him to survive had vanished. In their place stood a husband and a wife, bound by something stronger than any legal deed or poker game win. Bound by choice, by battle, and by a love that was as vast and enduring as the land they called home.